Today we're going to talk about the music of Erich Zann by H.P. Lovecraft. This was written in 1921 and published in 1922, so still one of his earlier works. But unlike a number of the earlier works, you really get a sense here that he is honing his craft and becoming very good at creating a storyline that draws you in, creating a scene which is very engaging, and this is my favorite piece so far of the pieces I have read. And I have heard from other people that this is their favorite piece of all of his works, which then makes me a little sad if it goes downhill a bit from here. But I really enjoyed this piece a lot, so it's good that I got a chance to read it. It involves a street which one could call a trap street. And trap streets in mapping is when a map maker would put a fake street into their map for the sole purpose of catching other people who then stole his map to publish, instead of actually going out on the ground and going around through the streets and mapping it out. So it'd be like if you took a picture of a Google map and then tried to publish it and claimed that it was all your own work, that you would actually go out on the streets. If Google Map put a fake street in somewhere and then you copied that fake street, it would be pretty clear that your map was a copy of their map because of the fake street. And that is sort of what is happening here, that there's this street in a reasonably large-sized French city. They never say exactly where it is, but it is a street that he remembers, but he never can find again and can't find any proof that anyone else has ever heard of this street. It's just a completely lost in the dimensional folding kind of street. We never learn the main character's name. We start, as many of these Lovecraft do, which tends to annoy me, at the end. It says that he's already gone through this and he survived, and now he's looking back at it, which then, to me, pulls away a lot of the excitement of reading the story, because we know he's going to survive. We know that he's looking back at this and is curious about what happened, and the world didn't end and any of that kind of stuff. So I wish that he would just, Lovecraft that is, would write these stories forward from the beginning so we get the sense of anticipation and what's going to happen to this person. But we know the person survives because he's talking about it long after the fact, and he says that he has all sorts of mental challenges and health challenges, but he remembers back to when he was in college and he lived just for a short while at this mysterious street that he can't find anymore. And he was in a troubled time during his college career, and he moved from place to place, so it sort of all ran together at this point, as he's an older person and doesn't really remember how he got there or why he moved there, other than he probably got kicked out from some other apartment because he hadn't paid his rent. So here he is, a impoverished college student, and he has to find a place to live, and all he knows about this place is that it is across a dark river, and there's all sorts of warehouses, and that it's a super steep road that goes up to the very top where there's a wall going across the top. So it's a dead-end road. Dead-end road with all sorts of twisty, convoluted buildings along the sides that look like they're falling over. They're leaning left and leaning right. The road itself isn't even a car road or a horse-drawn wagon road. We don't know exactly when this takes place, but sometime in the recent past, we're saying around the, after the Industrial Revolution, because there's all these factories and stenches and smoke and everything else. So definitely a rundown part of town that has a very steep pedestrian road with cobblestones and grass and stone slabs, and the houses are tall and all leaning back and forth, and some of them even have little bridges going across from the one side of the road to the other so that they can get across from the higher levels. And the house that he happens to live in is the third from the top, but it's also the tallest. So even though it's not at the top of the hill, it is tall enough that it looks over the two neighbors uphill from it. And it's the only one that has a window that looks out over the terminating wall, the wall at the end of this dead end. So it's the only one that can look down and see what's on the other side of the hill that this street and houses are on. So he has a room on the 5th floor. He's the only one on the 5th floor. And up above him is the attic, and that's where he starts hearing music coming from. And it's the attic room that can see over the terminating wall and see what's beyond it. So as he's in his room, he hears strange music coming from the attic floor. And he's told that it's an old German viol player. It's like a big cello. And that the instrument, the musician, is unable to speak. So the musician plays at a cheap theater orchestra, and that when he comes home from the theater late at night, he plays some music for himself to practice or whatever, and then he goes to sleep. So this student, who we never learn the name of, is intrigued by the music. It's just over his head, and he hears it, and he sounds sort of weird, and he's curious about it. He is intrigued by the harmonies of it, and he really wants to meet the musician because he thinks this is pretty neat. So he happens to meet the musician in the hallway, and he expresses that he would like to hear the music and learn more about it. The musician is a small, lean, and bent person with shabby clothes, blue eyes, grotesque satyr-like face, and a nearly bald head. And he's a little nervous about playing the music, but then he allows the student to come up, and the room itself is also very grungy, so this fits in with the whole industrial poor living near the factories and not having very much. He just has a dingy washstand and a small table. He has a large bookcase, that's something in his favor, and lots of dust and cobwebs. So they sit down and they listen to the music, and the student enjoys the music, but it's not the same kind of haunting kind of music that he heard from his room. So now he's curious why he is playing something different. Although, musicians play all sorts of different things, so it makes sense that he wouldn't play the same thing every single night. But anyway, the student asks about it, and the musician gets really upset by this, and especially when the student starts whistling a little piece of the music that he overheard, the person is very upset. The musician is very upset about this and tells him to be quiet. And he keeps looking out the window, which is the window that overlooks the top of the hill and down into the town nearby. So the student wants to look out the window, but the musician gets really upset and doesn't want anyone near his window. And they sit down, and the musician, who can't talk, writes a note that says, please, I'm sorry for when I get a little agitated. I live alone. I'm eccentric. And I'm not really sure that I want you listening in on my practicing of my music. So I will pay extra for you to have a lower room because, you'd pay more because they didn't have elevators in places like this. So the lower rooms were more expensive. So the musician is going to pay the difference between the upper floor room and the lower floor room so that the student can live on the lower floor and not have to overhear the music. So the student, says, oh, this poor old guy is getting all agitated. I'm just sitting here listening to the music. There's no reason to bother him. So they depart as friends, and the student does indeed get the more expensive room on the lower floor, and now he can't hear the music anymore because they're too far away in terms of floor distance. But the student still wants to listen to the music because he enjoyed it, and he tries to talk to the musician and be able to go up and hear it, and the musician now makes clear that he really doesn't want the student listening in, which is the whole reason he encouraged the student to move down a floor. So instead, the student goes up and sneakily listens in at the window and overhears the music through the closed door. The door I meant before, not the window. So listening in at the keyhole in the closed door. And he's upset by the kinds of sound that he's hearing. He's hearing sounds like filled him full of vague wonder and brooding mystery. And he's nervous about the kinds of music that is being played. And then one of the nights, he hears this shrieking viol swell into a chaotic babble of sound. So he's really worried about this because he's worried that the poor musician's having some sort of a breakdown. And finally, he gets the musician to let him in, and he's worried that the musician has had some sort of collapse or something. And the musician is glad to let him in and just sits there for a little while. And then the musician writes the student a note and says, I'm going to tell you what's happening, which is, of course, quite interesting. And then he sits down to write the more complete description of what's happening. Now, foolishly, this makes no sense at all to me. The musician is writing for a full hour, and instead of giving the student the first page to read while he writes the second page, the musician keeps writing and writing sheets and sheets while the student just sits there waiting and waiting and waiting. So as we can imagine, this happens in these kinds of situations. The student never actually gets his hand on these sheets of paper because something exciting happens. You start to hear a distant musical note out the window coming from over the lofty wall. And as soon as this music starts up from outside the window, the musician jumps up and starts playing his viol. And he is trying to drown it out. He's playing a wild Hungarian dance. And it says that it's the first time that the student recognized the music, that he was playing something that was a known piece and not just other things that he didn't quite understand. And that it seems like the musician is trying to drown out the music that's coming in from the window, and the musician gets louder and louder, louder and louder, wilder and wilder, and you still hear the calm, deliberate, purposeful mocking note from far away in the west. And then while they're having this musician duel between the musician in the house and the music coming from far away, the wind starts to really spring up, and it's shaking the window and shaking the shutters, and then starts slamming against the window, and then the glass breaks open, and the candles sputter, and all the sheets mysteriously blow up and out the window. So all of these notes that the musician had been writing for the student go flying out the window, and of course now he can't read any of the description of what the mute guy was trying to tell him about what's going on. So then he goes and looks out the window, and he expects to see the big city spread out before them and all the lights and all that kind of stuff, but he only sees the blackness of space. Unimagined space alive with motion and music, having no semblance to anything on earth. And then the wind blows out the candles. So now he's in complete darkness with the musician playing loudly and wildly, the wind blowing, and the strange noise coming from outside the window. So I love all of the descriptions in this. Do a great job of building this all up and making it very visceral, that you can feel the wind, you can see the candles going out, you can hear the music thundering. A lot of the different senses are involved here, that you get this sense of really being there. So the student is now plunged into complete darkness because there's no moon or anything outside. He staggers backwards, he crashes against a table, he overturns a chair, and then he tries to get to the musician and tries to shake him to get him to stop playing. And the viol is still shrieking on, and when the student touches the musician is ice cold, stiffened, unbreathing face with glassy eyes bulging uselessly into the void. And then the student goes racing out and gets outside into the hallway. It goes down the endless stairs, races out into the streets, and then down into the other streets in the city. And he says that there was no wind, and the moon was out, and all the lights of the city twinkled. So the world, once he gets out of that house and street, is normal again, with the moon and with wind, not wind, with no wind, and with city lights. So the world is normal. It was only up in that particular attic that we had this wild wind and complete darkness and the music of the other person playing. And then he says at the end, despite my most careful searches and investigations, I have never since been able to find the street, and I'm not sorry because I'm not sure what even happened, because I think he's worried that the true knowledge of it would drive him insane. So I love the descriptions here. I love the tall, creaky street. I mean, there's numerous artists that do this kind of artwork, and Harry Potter had this kind of artwork. There's all sorts of stories, Edgar Allan Poe, of twisty streets with twisty houses and little cobblestones and everything else. The place that the poor were forced to live, near factories, stenching smoke and gas and all that sort of stuff. So I really enjoy the descriptions. I enjoy the scenario. And it's this student that's already having all sorts of trouble, so he's barely holding it together, and then he starts hearing this music and is trying to figure out what's going on. And he never does. And I like the musician having a music war with something else that we don't even know what it is, but you get a sense that it's really dangerous, and that the musician feels that he has to do everything he possibly can to drown out the music. So I guess my thought on that is that the music that's coming in from the outer world is some sort of a demon creature, a dangerous creature, and his music is a way to affect the people in our world, to, I don't know, brainwash them or to trick them into doing something, or maybe just to drive them all crazy. And this musician has found that if he can drown it out, that he can stop this enemy from being able to make progress on whatever his goal is, and that he's been doing this for a while because he's got himself set up in this top floor, and this is the best place that he can find to be able to send out his opposite signal, sort of like how music cancels itself out if you have two waves that are going the exact same speed and so on. So he's trying to cancel out or override the signal that this alien is sending in that's going to cause harm to us, and he's the lone protector. But he doesn't want anyone to know. Maybe he thinks that people will think he's crazy and haul him off, and then there'll be no one left to defend us. You know, how would you tell someone about that? Or maybe he's been told that if he tells anyone that he's going to be, I don't know, killed off in some other way. You know, you have to wonder why, because he's very elderly. You'd think that he would want to be enlisting another musician, even if he just found one other musician to be able to help him out and take his place when he passes away, because he's not going to live forever, one would think. So that's a question to be asked. And he ends up dying in the end. So now what the question is, you know, if that musician is dead and there is no one left to counter the message of the space alien or whatever it is that's sending out the opposing message, are they going to succeed in their opportunity to brainwash everyone? But this is written far after the fact, and we don't get any sense of any sort of consequence. He doesn't say, oh, and then this region of Paris had this happen. So it seems like nothing at all happened as a result of this musician passing away and not being able to send their opposing signal out into the music verse. Now this road then couldn't be found. So maybe this road only existed for these musicians to have this duel in, and once the elderly musician passed away, then the road just vanished, because that was its purpose, was to be able to be a location for this kind of musical battle to go on. So that could be as well. A lot of different interpretations, but that's the fun of this story, is that it encourages me to think about all these different options and why was it there and why did it vanish and what was that musician actually up to. So I enjoyed it immensely. I enjoyed the plot and the descriptions. I wish it did not have the person telling it after the fact so that we know that he survives. That's just the way that he goes. I don't mind that the main character is unnamed and undescribed. That's all right. I suppose it sort of makes him into an every person. Other than that, I enjoyed it a lot. So let me know what your thoughts are on this story. I would love to hear if you enjoyed it as much as I did.